Well, hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. I'm Julie Szmyd, host for this room and club. And just as we get started, I have a few Clubhouse pointers. You can use a little plus sign at the bottom to ping others you think may be interested in the conversation into this room. If you have a lot of followers, you can narrow the search by topic, something that might pop up in their bio, and that way those individuals will pop up, and then you can just tap on their faces, and hopefully some of those people might join us this morning. You'll want to make sure you check out and follow others in the room, so be sure to check out everyone's bio, follow me, Elizabeth, everyone on the panel. We invite you to consider following the new Clubhouse members in the room. Those are identified with the party hats. And be sure to raise your digital hand. We'll do our very best to get to everyone, but this is certainly an interactive room. We encourage participation, so if you have questions or you'd like to chime in, please do so. Our club is called Consuli Conversations, so be sure to follow us. You can tap the little green house next to the name at the top. That way you'll get notified whenever we have host our rooms. In addition to our data dignity room, we also host a long COVID and a clinical trials room. So again, you can see all that in my bio and follow me and follow our Consuli Conversations Club. If you have any direct questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, if you'd like to recommend someone to be on our panel, please contact me directly. My email is in my bio. Additionally, all our social medias to follow Consuli are there if you'd like to learn more about us. And for those of you that don't yet know Consuli broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company. The mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. Experts suggest our individual data is worth $20,000 per year. So we help people take control and choose who gets access to and how their personal health information is used, and if and when desired, get them paid for their data and make medicine better. So we do this by operating a marketplace for members where we become their agent. Our members receive smart matched individualized offers from us for opportunities, including to participate in clinical trials and data trials. There is no cost to join our movement. You can learn more at consuli.net, that's consuli.net. Again, this information can be found in my bio. Please check us out. It's now my pleasure to turn the floor over to our room moderator, Elizabeth Dreicer, who is a philanthropist, activist, and co-founder and CEO of Consuli. Elizabeth will be introducing our distinguished panelists and guests. Elizabeth, over to you. This is Julie, and I'm done speaking.
Hi, this is Elizabeth. Thanks, Julie, so much. And always, thanks for helping pull this room together. Welcome, and thanks so much for the panelists. I'd like to introduce them. So first, I'd like to introduce Yvonne Wilson. Yvonne has a tech industry background focused on cybersecurity, identity management, privacy, and enterprise architecture. And her background includes stints at Sun Microsystems, Oracle, and Auth0. Yvonne founded a suite of identity management services at Oracle, Managed Cloud Services. She also published a book on identity management, Solving Identity Management for Modern Applications. Additionally, she is a cybersecurity advisor for diverse tech startups, and she currently is the Chief Strategy Officer for Exploit Defense, a cybersecurity consulting firm. So Yvonne, thanks so much for being with us and welcome. Next on our panel, we have Terrence. He is the Chief Investment Officer for the Impact Seat, one of the leading independent investors in high growth technology companies led by women, especially women of color. At the Impact Seat, Terrence leads investment activities and provides post-investment support for over 60 portfolio companies and monitors their LP investments in several venture funds. He's an experienced technologist himself, a speaker and author. He's founded multiple companies and has served as the CTO at multiple venture-backed companies, including the Mayfield-funded Consensus Software and several pioneering enterprise and big data software companies. Terrence was one of the earliest Black CEOs and founders to raise venture capital way back in 1998, and uses that experience and expertise to improve the startup ecosystem. His goal has been to support other non-traditional founders in navigating the startup scene. His efforts to increase inclusion in the startup ecosystem led Terrence to join the executive team at Astia Angels, an international angel group focused on investing in high growth companies with women on the leadership team. And during his time at Astia, Terrence ran a pilot investment program to support women of color called the Representation Program, funded by strategic corporate funders. The program was such a success that Astia has now made it a permanent part of their investment platform. Additionally, Terrence's book, Privacy and Big Data, has been translated into several languages and is currently available for purchase on numerous platforms, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Books, etc. Okay, thanks so much, Terrence. Really glad to have you here. Next up, we've got Linda MacDonald Glenn. Linda is the founding director of the Center for Applied Values and Ethics and Advanced Technologies, Caveat, good acronym, at Crown College, University of California, Santa Cruz. She is a recovering attorney, but also an ethicist, futurist, educator, and advisor with over 30 years of experience in a variety of sectors, including exponential technology, healthcare, government, education, business ethics, and futures forecasting. Welcome, Linda. I think we've got a couple of recovering attorneys on this panel. We'll get to the next one.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, really glad to have you. Also joining us is Mike Golden. Mike is enabling researchers with a new way of doing deep real-world evidence at Savana, which uses AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, ML, NLP, natural language processing. I'm trying to make sure that we have all the acronyms defined here, to surface valuable insights and correlations buried in electronic health records, basically unstructured text at scale. He previously led business development for a similar AI platform at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, UPMC, with a focus on risk adjustment and quality HEDIS. The remainder of Michael's 20 years of health tech experience includes launching connected medical devices at Philips, Samsung, Qualcomm, and his own startup. He advises or sits on the board of several small health tech companies, including he's also here at Consuli helping us, and holds a couple patents in digital therapeutic delivery. So Mike, welcome. And he's also new to Clubhouse, so folks do follow him. So he's got the party hat. He's less than a week old. So, all right. So next we have with us, actually, I think Alice may be joining us, and I'll introduce her when she comes. But last but not least, Rob McCrae has served as a healthcare industry in the healthcare industry as a lawyer, CEO, investor, and investment banker. Rob is a member of the board of directors of Macro Health, Alliance Healthcare Foundation, where he's also past board chair, and Consuli, which he is also one of our co-founders. He serves on the PCH Alliance board of directors and is president of the Wireless Life Science Alliance, which he co-founded in 2005, which is now HIMSS. Rob chairs the Macro Health Compensation Committee, serves on the HIMSS Governance Committee, and the Alliance Finance and Program Committee. So welcome, Rob. So glad you're here. Okay, so that's our panel. Now what I'd like to do is turn the mic to each of our panelists to give some opening remarks on this wild new landscape. Some of it's new old in the sense that some of us have been working on it for a couple of decades, but there's always a new frame, and would love to hear the perspective. So actually, if I might start with Terrence. Terrence, may I turn the mic to you to set the stage?
Actually, I'm happy to try and do so, and thank you for inviting me, and pleasure to be on a panel with such distinguished folks. My interest in privacy started primarily from my interest in big data and enterprise software systems, and really became focused on the sharing of personal identifiable information across enterprise systems, and how little thought started and gone into as a vendor, how we captured this information, how we used it, how we shared it. And then moving from there to the area of social media, watching social media essentially hoover up everybody's personal information in exchange for essentially a blog page, really started to become concerned and really look at the implications of the erosion of privacy in the digital age. A couple of things that I focused on is one, healthcare data and sort of the use of healthcare data. The other big concerns that I've always been particularly focused on is how do state actors use this data, and how do we control the amount of data that state actors have on their populations, given what we've seen in China and what we've seen in North Korea. It's very clear how coercive our personal information can become, and how do we, as the sort of industrialized West, how do we preserve our democratic values and our privacy in this new age?
Yeah, some very substantial issues that are definitely still in the land of unresolved. Thanks so much for bringing forward those. Next, I'd love to turn the mic over to Linda. Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I picked up some interest in this a few years ago, and am still working on this article that I called Data Brokers and the Protection Racket, Forget About It, or the Protection Racket, not just for organized crime anymore. The, protection racket often starts with a conversation like, oh, that's some awfully nice data you got there. It would be a shame if something happened to it. And the implication is that for an exacted price, that something you treasure can be protected. And there's some rampant conflicts of interest. And I'm really interested in hearing how we can break this cycle, how we can give personal data back to the person. So that's what I'm bringing with me, and I'm really excited to be a part of this. I love the idea of Consuli, and I'm excited to hear more about it.
Linda, thanks so much. Appreciate the also love the titles, and I think you're revealing, is it Rhode Island? Is that the accent?
You know what? It's New Jersey. I worked actually.
Okay.
Yeah, and I put it. I worked really hard to get rid of that accent, but for the purposes of that, I slipped back into it.
I think it's perfect, appropriate.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, great. And Rob, I'd like to turn the mic to you. Although you have to find the mic.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I was tapping the wrong mic. Well, I'm just here to learn, Elizabeth. This is a great group. And but as you know from a number of years that we've spent together on various endeavors and boards, I come at this from kind of a perspective, and I was trained in philosophy before I went into law, and I'm beyond a recovering lawyer because it's hard to even remember that many years back, although I did it for a long time. But I think in terms of the trade-offs as we navigate through to what I would hope would be a system supporting an agreed upon cultural framework for how we manage private health data and the needs of community and our social responsibilities related to how that can be used. And I think, we have been in this wild, wild west, mostly unregulated area for so long, as everybody appreciates, from general data hoovering and reuse. And there is great good that can come from that, and sometimes does, but obviously there's huge mischief. And then there's that tough issue of our individual rights as a human being to have some control over what happens to all aspects of our, being, not just our physical self, but our thoughts, our ideas, and the facts that come out of medical care, medical research. So I think we have some real, issues, and we can get through them. But it's, privacy versus public health, interoperability versus privacy, social benefit versus personal benefits. It's issues like that that we have to navigate, and I think we can. And I'm glad you're hosting this conversation.
Thanks so much, Rob. So many polarities that you raised there. And unifying them is, I think, the body of work, including for policymakers, which I know we may have some policymakers join us in this conversation today, which I think is also another aspect of what's needed to pave the way forward. I'd like to turn the mic now to Yvonne. Yvonne, the floor is yours.
Sorry, it took me a minute to come off mute. This is Yvonne. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to hearing everybody's perspectives. I come to the discussion with a tech industry background, bringing in the cybersecurity, identity management, privacy perspective. And one of the critical things that you need to do when deploying large-scale software systems, including security systems, is anticipate the problems that may come up in how human beings are going to use the system in the real world and mitigate those issues, including the possibility for some antisocial or downright criminal behavior. So I'm very intrigued about the possibilities of the data dignity movement. And, as an engineer, naturally, my thoughts are turning to what are some of the problems we'll hit when you attempt to do this in the real world, and how can we solve them, especially considering security and privacy and digital fairness and cybercrime. I volunteer in my spare time to promote engineering and reducing the digital divide. So trying to think through fairness is another issue I'm concerned with. And one example I was thinking about was, should or will there be a difference between data associated with strongly proven identities versus weak identities, even if the personally identifiable data around that is anonymized in some way, because we've already seen some very negative, antisocial behavior enabled by the anonymity on the internet. So I think it's reasonable to assume that that could happen in other spaces. And so how can we anticipate what might happen and design appropriate mitigations so that it ends up being a positive experience? So that's just one of many examples I've been thinking about. It's going to require many backgrounds. So thank you to Consuli for bringing all of us together for this important discussion. This is Yvonne, and I'm done.
Thanks, Yvonne. This is Elizabeth, and I forgot we need to do the closed caption thing, so I'll be getting better at that. Thanks for that opening. And next, I'd like to turn the mic over to Mike Golden. Mike, the floor is yours.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. I want to involve with this a little bit at UPMC, applying. Sorry for the office. The unstructured free text in Docker, right, is approximated to be about 80% of your value. So I was using it for risk adjustment and revenue savings for the past. And those fell under TP treatment and payment operations, so we didn't need patient consent. But then in the heart of the pandemic, I had the opportunity to apply the same technologies, but for research purposes. And that opened my eyes to how much of our data is being used without us knowing, and frankly, how much people are willing to pay for. So, I ended up connecting through Rob and Elizabeth and Consuli, and with the mission of opening up that transparency and potentially benefiting on a little bit. But I'd be remiss if we did it the wrong way and we did advanced research, but I don't think that's the case. I think another benefit of this is going to be faster time to research. The contracts that I do with hospitals are 6 months to get the de-identified data. If we do this right, I think we can provide the transparency and financial benefits to patients, but also even make research faster and more possible. So that's why I'm excited.
Thanks so much, Mike. Appreciate the beginning here. So we've heard a little bit from our panel. We're going to actually get into the dialogue part. I do want to just remind the audience that, folks in the audience, if you have something that you want to contribute to the conversation, this is meant to be interactive. So please raise your digital hand. Julie will bring you to the stage and we'll get to you in order. We'll endeavor to get to all questions and comments if we can. And with that, I just want to sort of open up the dialogue here. We've heard, some of the core issues identified. What I'm curious about is we think about what is required to get from here to, sort of a state. Some of the things that we've heard in past conversations, have included, and we heard it again today here, the state actor piece. We've certainly, Terrence and others have raised the issue of, okay, great, but what about the state actors? What about weaponizing commercial content? Sort of all that, what I'll put in the negative influence category. Then we've talked a lot about 21st century, laws and what is required, both from identity and privacy as well as commercialization. But what about that commercial data market? The secondary market, the transferring to third parties, the issue of, is it even possible to deal with de-identification once you're in the realm of medical data? So the importance of personalized economic interest. What about research rights? Kind of the altruism that researchers are currently operating under. And Mike, I appreciate your comment around how we're potentially accelerating versus this somehow being an impediment to research. All the different data types, this sort of like, how are we going to deal with data in this global borderless world, this complex systems problem, centralized repositories, blockchain tokens. I'm just sort of peppering the conversation for my next question, which is, how do we get from here to where we need to be? I'd love to hear the panelists articulate, what do we think's missing? Is it a public policy? Or do we think we've got the right public policies? Is it systems? So I'd like to throw the door open to how do we get to the next? And with that, if you want to flash your mics or take yourself off of mute, that's one way I know that you're ready to jump in. So the panelists, and if I don't see any flashing mics or anybody taking themselves off mute, then I guess I'll just do the thing that moderators do from time to time, and that is, say your name. So does anybody, Terrence, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
In terms of how do we get to a better place in terms of privacy and digital dignity, I think the most important thing that has to happen is we have to raise this as an issue with the public to the appropriate level of importance. Right now, I think if you query the general public, they are not concerned about digital privacy in any significant way, either from commercial actors or state actors. And I really think that we in the community that understand sort of the immense implications of having this data available about people that's being traded as any other commodity, we need to explain to people why digital dignity is important, why controlling your data is important, why you don't necessarily want to trust multinational corporations with your medical data in unrestricted ways. And that conversation needs to happen before any public policy conversation is going to be effective in my view.
Linda, I see you took yourself off mute. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So the Federal Trade Commission actually wrote this report back in 2014, talking about the importance of protecting consumer data privacy, and made a lot of arguments for both accountability and transparency. Now, that was in 2014. During the previous administration, a lot of the recommendations were from this report were simply either outright ignored or reversed. So I have to say, I think that would be a really good starting place to make sure that those recommendations and regulations that were recommended by the Federal Trade Commission be put back into place under this current administration and in front of Congress.
So Linda, just broadly for our audience and for the rest of us, what do you think the core tenets of that, the recommendations that you think, are essentially gutted? What, if you were to just describe them briefly, can you maybe illuminate that for the rest of us?
So part of the big issue is transparency, that people don't even realize what information is being gathered about them. There's 9 major players in this field who collect the data. They are not household names. And I have to say, I echo what Terrence said about educating people in terms of who is collecting this data and what they're doing with it. So certainly one place would be to start with transparency. To get the consumer's consent up front and to make it something that people do talk about. Plus, one of the things that certainly I've been observing is that there are companies that put these apps out there that ask you to, and they will give you, I don't know, 5 cents here, 20 cents there. What are they doing with that data? I think really we could, one of the major places we could start is with a call for transparency. And so I think I'll just leave it at that for now.
Understood, thanks. And I think I see Yvonne coming off mute. Yvonne, you want to get in on this? Yeah, hi, this is Yvonne. A typical approach I've used in the past is to think through, first of all, who are the stakeholders? Who will be touched by this? What are their requirements or their desires? And in a situation like this is going to include people whose data might be sold, the buyers, the sellers, any middlemen, others who are profiting off of it, legal and law enforcement, because they always come in. That's human nature. And certainly those concerned with privacy and fairness and technology people. There's going to be technology in this. And then understanding all of those requirements and desires, you can start to then create principles. What principles should guide the initiative? As an example, we have principles like you don't buy blood donations or human organs because that drives the wrong behavior. So you can create some principles and then a target state. What does it look like? And then plan some steps to get there. And certainly many of the things mentioned by Terrence and Linda, like transparency, will be part of that. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth. This is Yvonne and I'm done. Thank you, Yvonne. This is Elizabeth. So just building off that a little bit. Okay, so awareness, public awareness, policy, transparency, as articulated, and then, Yvonne, your points about really figuring out the stakeholders and, what are the guiding principles and the future state. Curious what folks think about, we've had in California, and I know a lot of our panelists, with the exception of Mike, are residents in California, and there was a recent sweeping piece of legislation that went into effect, I guess, in January of 2020. So last year seems like a blur, but nevertheless, really calling for enhanced privacy rights. And, and in that privacy rights, the current communication is, hey, if you want to use this, you have to opt in, or, you don't need to use this service and you opt out. Curious what folks think about the current state of the privacy regulations, particularly California. And then we'll also be talking in a little bit about, some of the specific health related privacy and interoperability. But first I'd like to, kind of get a sense of where folks feel we are on the California privacy scene. And I'm wondering if Lyndon or Rob, might want to weigh in here.
Well, I would say certainly that the California Consumer Privacy Act is a good place to start. I mean, it includes liability, actual damages, punitive damages. And under the law, consumers have the right to request a business to disclose the categories and specific pieces of personal information it's collecting about a consumer, and the right to delete it. Now, I haven't seen how that is being put into action yet. And part of that might be just because everything slowed down because of the pandemic. So I think it's important to educate people about this, to bring this out. And I mean, for example, the law gives a really extensive list of things that would normally be considered personal information, like email addresses, IP addresses, of course, your driver's license numbers, credit card numbers. So the question that I have, and I have not seen it yet, is how is this being enforced? There certainly have been data breaches. And you know what, I have to admit, I'm just not necessarily seeing the teeth in this law. Rob, have you seen anything, or?
Well, no, I actually, I think California law is a little closer to GDPR, which regulates a lot more people than even the US federal law would. And that's probably a good thing. I don't think either of them are perfect. And I think it will take years to see how they are deployed within industry and enforced. And, the challenge I think that we have with these kinds of structures is that technology is very dynamic, and legal and regulatory structures are decidedly non-dynamic primarily. And so I don't think we can expect perfection from these initial attempts to do it. But so from my perspective, they're going in the right direction. Just to kind of slightly redirect or suggest another kind of point of view on this, I think it's easier to talk about data dignity and public policy in healthcare for health data, personal health data specifically, separate from the broad category of all of our privacy rights, and because you really get into issues there of what is data, and so I think you have to look vertically to do it. In healthcare, I can see a way to come up with a structure that might be societally acceptable, culturally acceptable even, that would form kind of a more foundation for better policy and then enactment in legislation and regulation. But in the general economy, it's so much more difficult to do it. I mean, for example, we all drive on public roads in our cars, and we're tracked one way or another. And that turns into traffic reports that are shared with, everyone. In the old way it was by radio, and now it's by app. And I guess a certain level, that sort of data that we're just contributing, and there doesn't seem to be harm done by bundling that up and then coming up with a service. On the other hand, of course, there are many ways that our much more private data are bundled without us even knowing, and used in ways that either hurt us or don't benefit us, that we do need to regulate, pay attention to. So I think maybe healthcare is easier to talk about.
I agree, Rob. I think healthcare is easier to talk about because, well, I think maybe most of the people on the panel know this, but not a lot of people do not realize that Apple Watches and Fitbits got exemptions from the FDA to be declared medical devices. And so in this time when we have moved away from centralized clinical trial to decentralized clinical trial, companies can certainly they're collecting data that is clearly protected by HIPAA, but a lot of the data, like that of Fitbit and the Apple Watch, is not protected with, it's not protected under HIPAA. So, query as to what is being done with that data that is not HIPAA protected.
Really important distinction, right? And HIPAA is another old piece of legislation. Terrence, I want to let you get in on this.
I just back to sort of the original question about the California privacy infrastructure. A couple of years ago, I had a really interesting conversation with a gentleman that helped draft some of that legislation. And he brought up two issues that I think are really germane to any entity that's trying to regulate privacy in digital ways. The first concern was complexity. The ability of the government to even understand the data being collected and sort of the more complex inference algorithms that can be applied to derive even more personal information is really moving much faster than the government's ability to comprehend, particularly since a lot of these systems, say Facebook, have really moved beyond in complexity, beyond humans' capability to comprehend as a whole. These are very complex systems with multi-million lines of code in data centers distributed across the world. And the idea that government's going to be able to keep up with their data capturing capabilities, in my view, is fallacious. The other interesting thing that he said to me that I hadn't thought about was that when they drafted the legislation, they did so with the idea that they weren't going to be aggressively implementing against smaller companies, because they were very concerned if they implemented strict privacy regulation on smaller companies, they would destroy the innovation economy in California. And so there was a deliberate effort to focus on larger data gatherers. But as somebody mentioned earlier in the call, some of the most pernicious data gathering applications are these small apps that you see running on the various app stores. So I just wanted to add that for a little color to the California legislation discussion.
Thank you. Go ahead. I think I saw somebody else jump in.
Yeah, hi, this is Lisa Berkeley. And you're raising a lot of very interesting questions. And one of them, I actually have two that have come to mind. And one is focused on international security and who can purchase this data. Because when you think of different state actors, the harm or the manipulation of information that can occur with or potential funding for an issue is incredibly relevant at both the national and international levels. So that's one question that's been coming up for me as we've been listening to this conversation. The other question is, and I think it was Michael, and I think Linda, a couple of people have made reference to what are the perceived positive effects that are coming from this? And is there a way to explore that in order to highlight to the general public, this is the positive side, but let's also explore the negative side or the challenges to it? Because I know many people, you get your Facebook ads or your Instagram ads, and that it's so tailored and custom that it's I've been in conversations where people say, oh, it's great, this is the best item that I've gotten. I really love that these ads are targeted towards me. They save me time and ultimately may save me money. So I think that those are part of a couple of questions and things to be examined within this conversation. Thank you, I'm done.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you bringing that forward. Any of our panelists want to jump in here on this, and then we'll get to Matt afterwards. I want to just have an opportunity for the panel to reflect on Lisa's comments. I see you took yourself off mute. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm not in California, not familiar with the law, but something that we should reminder I see as potentially running into here. So being in a role where I'm collecting patient data, I could see someone making the argument that, well, we identify that data as no longer keep an eye on what all the other things include for some of the research that I'm working on. So I think that's going to have to be it again is that fine line of how do we educate the public and have them understand whether it's an opt-in or an opt-out, but then also very quickly having a tool ready to let them opt in.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. So anybody else? Yvonne, I think you're off mute. I'm going to turn the floor to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something that Michael mentioned in terms of education and the CCPA regulations here in California. Are people taking advantage of it? I don't think most people understand, possibly even that it exists, why they should understand it, and what they may want to take advantage of. And I think it shows that the importance of designing how you educate society about something. We've just seen huge issues during the pandemic about getting accurate information to all sectors of society, and digital dignity will face that same challenge. Having to figure out how do we both plan how to educate people about an opportunity or a regulation in the case of CCPA, and how to take advantage of it, including the people that may not have a lot of spare time or internet access to research that. And unfortunately, plan for misinformation that certain stakeholders for their interest may want to try to disseminate. This is Yvonne, and I'm done.
Thank you, Yvonne. I appreciate that. I think we just, the gentleman that was waiting, sorry about that. I think hopefully he comes back and raises his hand again. So maybe now turning our discussion. So from the dialogue around like, what do we need? Obviously education, Yvonne, you're raising a really important point. It's a new category, public doesn't yet even, definitely, I think the vast majority of the public doesn't understand the privacy laws. I think they're encountering these sort of nuisances that I would say, pop up on their screen telling them, you have to accept this to move forward. And I think, is that, I guess the real question is that really a viable way to implement this? You've got privacy, but essentially is privacy not shirked by simply, operators putting a screen in front that unless you accept, you're not moving forward on that site. So, I mean, is it somewhat feckless is my question, so does policy get there alone? Rob, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, that gets right into maybe healthcare is different from other situations, because I'm not sure what the right answer to that question is with respect to using Facebook for some purpose. I don't use it very much, right? And maybe there ought to be some right to use it, even if I don't agree to some of the data sharing that becomes, the consideration that the company demands from me and for this so-called free use. I think, but when you apply that concept to healthcare, then I think you immediately really quickly run into a problem of, I'll just throw something out there. I just don't think there's a personal right of privacy around the outcomes of healthcare services, and this is obviously within the context of protecting the individual patient's identity, which is not always easy. But when you're dealing with a hospital doing procedures, I don't think the hospital or patients have the right to privacy over negative outcomes. I think that's something that society regulators have to know about, so that we can have a better system. And so that's where I think it's easy to talk about healthcare and how you might apply some of the basic principles in the California Act to health data and talking about just the general level.
Go ahead. Just one thing, Linda, before you jump in, just something to just tee up. So we've talked about healthcare data in the context of what Rob is articulating, but what about, the forms that we fill out, which mostly are still paper forms, when you go to see whomever, that essentially you're agreeing, and ultimately your data is being absorbed by that institution beyond just care. So now it's not just do you use Facebook, but it's do you go to the doctor in your health plan, and can you reasonably opt out of signing those forms and still get care? And the use case here that I'll raise is the sort of Ascension Google scenario where Ascension provided de-identified data, and now that's part of an AI. Those patients didn't agree to that, and arguably they have little rights to effectively protest. Just curious what what folks think about that. Linda, I'd love for you to comment on what you were going to say, but also if you want to touch on that, I'd love to hear that as well.
Actually, what you said kind of ties in exactly to what I was going to bring up, which actually echoes what Terrence, I think it was Terrence who was talking about the complexity of the issue. One of the things that we're doing at the center, Caveat, is we're creating a tech ethics review board, and this is an issue that we've been speaking about, looking at all the different angles, and our AI analysts would like, one of the things we'd like to see the companies do is explain or provide the metadata that they use, the algorithms that they use. Now, I know that companies are very protective of those algorithms, but and there's a lot of different aspects to this, but it kind of gets into the issue of what kind of biases there might be within those algorithms. And if our analysts could look at that, of course, in a confidential manner, I think the hope is that we'd be able to see in what manner the data might be skewed or biased, and how is it going to be protected, not protected, or end up with
Yeah, no, I totally understand the issue. And I think we're back into the, Terrence and Yvonne and, even Rob's complexity machine, right? It's sort of like, these systems are not just algorithms anymore, right? Because they're evolving, they're learning. And so at any moment in time, it's going to be a different answer. I'd love to hear from our panelists. Terrence, I see you came off mute, then Mike. Terrence, the floor is yours.
I think the real problem here is that we've moved, if you look at technology, we've moved beyond the scope of human cognition. The whole point of deep learning is to find patterns that humans miss. That level of complexity means that we will probably never completely understand the deep learning algorithms that are produced. What we can do is pay a lot of attention to the data. And here's the real problem. We are a biased society. Our collection of data is inherently biased by our unconscious biases. So every data set that's being used to train a deep learning algorithm implicitly has the biases of our society as part of it. And one of the hardest problems in computer science right now is to figure out how to de-bias data. I'm not sure that we will ever completely do that. And the implications of handing over data that we don't understand to systems that in some sense that we don't understand, to allow them to make decisions about our daily lives is a terrifying prospect. And I think we really need to start to think about how we get good data if we're going to allow data to drive decision making.
And I agree. Terrence. I don't think that we're ever going to be able to de-bias it, but certainly what we can do is at least start to recognize some of the biases and adjust for them.
Absolutely. And what I think we need to start doing is we need to start testing the outcomes of these systems. For example, there's a probation recommendation system that's used widely in the US that has been clearly shown to be biased against Black and brown people, though it's still being used widely. We need to look at the outcomes that these systems produce, and if they're showing things that are statistically pernicious, we need to fix them or start using them. Though I don't know if we have the will to do that yet.
Yeah, appreciate that round of commentary. I see we have a guest who has joined us and raised their hand. I want to give them an opportunity to ask a question or make a comment, and I'm going to turn the floor to Matt. This is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
Hey, thanks so much. I'm Matt. I'm a virtual primary care doctor. I do a lot of work with informatics in the data space, the health data arena. I'm in and out between patients. I leave, come back. But I'll circle back to that. Okay, kind of sort of what is the, someone's asking what does the international data use look like? We have HIPAA here in the United States, and GDPR is actually used over in the EU. And I kind of like that framework because it actually covers not just health data, but just consumer protection data in general. So I think in terms of, that was the main point I was going to bring up, is that there are data protection policies in place, again, for not necessarily full international, but at least US and EU and UK.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think, the good points. And I think the core issues that we're still facing here, is it gets down to that complexity, and Rob, you mentioned it, and everybody on this panel has mentioned it, is the sort of speed of innovation versus the capacity to fully comprehend and think through all the positive and negative effects and how that should be then governing our policies, right? And then, so there's the policy making, which there's pieces, still a work in progress, and then there's the practical application of those policies. And I would argue that it's not practically applicable yet if ultimately I may have rights, but I can't exercise those rights. And that's actually part of the undercurrent for Consuli. I'd be interested if others on the panel want to weigh in on that. Do we think that there's a practical mechanism forward that that really has these laws make a difference in sort of the outcomes?
I'll take it. Oh, go ahead, Linda.
No, I was going to say, actually, I think that that's one of the things we're trying to do is develop a mechanism to do that, because under traditional IRBs, most IRBs, well, they're limited to human subject protection, and so they wouldn't necessarily be able to look beyond, they can't look beyond any of those issues. But I do think what is needed is a team of experts in different areas. So I've talked to you a little bit about this, Elizabeth, but I think that's one of the things we're working on. But was it Rob who was going to, let me turn it over back to Rob or Terrence.
No, Linda, I appreciate your point. I think it's going to take a multidisciplinary team, and I think academia can certainly be an important source of intelligence here to help us think through all the pieces, as well as the practical actors in the space. It's why Yvonne and Terrence and others, and Matt, I appreciate all the commentary here. I see Rob took himself off mute, so Rob, I'm going to turn the floor to you, and then back to Matt. So Rob, the floor is yours.
Yeah, sure. Hi. A couple of things. One, I think academia can be it's an interesting possibility to create a committed, mission-oriented crowd using researchers that are associated with academia broadly. That said, I don't think that we can regulate, we're talking about bias and algorithms, which reflect the bias of underlying society and the people that are writing algorithms, et cetera. And I don't think we can manage that by reviewing the code. I think it's actually a case where we just need more transparency as to what the real world outcomes of the use of these products. And this is happening in real time now. The contrast that is really apparent to me is between a Tesla self-driving mechanism, technology, and I'll just call it Google Docs, analytics that's making, FDA has about half a dozen AI-based medical devices that are influencing diagnostic decisions by clinicians. And it's early days for that yet, but we know what happens when Tesla technology is misused, and it continues to happen. And one happened up here in the Bay Area last night with a 25-year-old sitting in the back seat as the car drove across the Interstate 80 on the Bay Bridge for the third or fourth time. He keeps doing it. Or accidents happen, and it's that's what you respond to, and then you can change the human user configuration to adjust that. The problem with in healthcare is that, of course, the outcomes from the use of those diagnostic clinical decision support systems are no more known than the human clinical decisions that are made. And so it's an example we somehow have to, in our system, actually develop more transparency within the rent structure.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I think we're back to the transparency. We're back to sort of a multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary, sort of policy, making, essentially an advisory. And it's interesting. One of the things that came up last time was the Center for Tech and Privacy, and I'm trying to remember the context. Maybe it was you, Terrence. I know we were together last time on this topic. And I saw you came off mute, so I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in. But I do want to kind of tie these pieces together. I mean, I think thematically we're dancing around sort of some core campfires here, right? You've got the information rights of the individual and the value of that data, which we all know. And, Michael has articulated that in the context of use cases that he's seeing directly. We've got the data, and sort of the outcomes oriented data that Rob is articulating, and gosh, these algorithms that are being, and all this, complex machine learning, AI that is inherently got, all the bias baked in, and we don't really understand that, and we don't really understand the outcome. So there's many different threads here, and I just want to acknowledge that we're dancing in a multidimensional, dialogue here. And I know for the listeners and for the panelists, I just want to acknowledge, yes, we are in the far reaches of the hinterlands here. And Linda, I see you came off mute, but Terrence, I saw you were off mute before. I want to give you the opportunity if you want to weigh in here.
Oh, I actually wasn't weighing in. I was just applauding Rob's comment.
Oh, okay, that's right. The flickering mic. Thank you very much. Okay, Linda, do I see you actually came off mute?
I did, and I just wanted to underscore what you said and acknowledge what Rob said, that this is not something that can be done. This needs to be a multidisciplinary approach, and there needs to be transparency as to the process. It can't be just academia alone. We need the voices of industry in there. So what would be best would be a public-private collaboration to look at these issues, because you want to look at this holistically. I mean, we're kind of grappling with this issue, looking at it and saying, how do we break this down? And part of the issue is that so many of these problems are sticky in the sense that they overlap into different areas. It's not necessarily just about algorithms. It's not necessarily just about even transparency. It ties in with a lot of other issues, and trying to untangle that Gordian knot, that's going to take, I would say, all hands on deck. I think Yvonne was trying to say something.
Yes, okay, great. Thank you, Linda. Yvonne, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks, Linda and Elizabeth. This is Yvonne. I certainly agree with everything that has been said. And I just thought I'd add that in that multidisciplinary, a lot of technology can play a role, from developing better testing capabilities so we understand what our systems are doing, but also innovation, given that we have a lot of privacy laws and people aren't even taking advantage of them. Maybe we need to ask why, and innovate to make it easier. And maybe one example is the terms of service. When you sit down to use a service, you have to agree to the service. And usually the terms of service and all the privacy statements. Now, usually you sit down to do something, you're trying to get something done. You don't have the time to read a 30-page document. They have you by the, you know what. It doesn't take into account the reality of human beings in real life. And I was thinking of the college application space. Students were having to do lots of applications, and they came in with a common app. It saves the applicants a lot of time. And so perhaps there could be some innovation where you have kind of a standardized service that people have to agree to. So they can do it once when they have time. And then when they go to use a service, they're not just kind of forced to click on it without reading it because it was poor timing.
I think that's an incredibly important addition, Yvonne, to the issue of practicality. Are people reasonably consenting when the terms of service is 30 pages and requires a lawyer to even understand it, right? Is that real, proper disclosure? I think those things are right there. And then the sort of solution or innovation that you're articulating around standardizing service, or somehow having a consumer oriented, hey, this has been checked for data dignity, right? I think it's a really interesting innovation, and thanks for surfacing that. Mike, I see you came off mute. I want to give you an opportunity, so the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Just real quick, I like that too, Yvonne. And I want to touch on two things. The algorithm, just as a practical matter, I get it ideally, but some of the quote deals that I work on are back end loaded, meaning there's not cash value from the algorithm. So they are pretty secretive. I think you mentioned that there's somebody that as a practical matter, it might be difficult to access to all of the algorithms. The two things that I see as barriers is there's a lot of money on some of these things. Some of those are 20 million or more for research. So you can imagine the hospitals, the physicians, people are getting paid. This is how they cover their salaries and things like that. So there's going to be some resistance if you don't show that they can continue to do research. Right? There's a path for them blocking data. Maybe to make it faster. Maybe one thought. The other thing is money. I tend to follow China the economics. And if we don't solve that problem for the patient, then maybe the doctor too. I'm not sure. But those are the two choose to get back to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate that. Really good points. Linda, I see you came off of mute. Want to give you the floor?
Okay, no, I was just going to agree with Michael. That is part of the sticky problem. And yeah, I am not quite, we're thinking about that. How do we address that issue? Because yeah, we certainly want to respect intellectual property. And it's not as if the answer, say, is to stop the research, but perhaps to weave a path. And it's not necessarily even just to come up with the answer, but at least for us to start discussing it, because some, it's a little bit of a cliche, but sometimes the journey is more important than the destination. How do we, and to me, that is a major question, how do we address these issues of the privacy of the algorithms and the impact economically? So thank you, Michael. I just wanted to say thanks for bringing that up. Well, you really nailed it.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I mean, Terrence, I see you came off mute. I'm going to give you, and Rob, I just want to weave one thing together, which is, I think about, there could be actually there could be potentially a mechanism, although, complexity reigns supreme, where code is essentially reviewed and, there's some, kind of persistent state of validating compliance with regulatory frameworks and or policies. I mean, that's an interesting in the sense of, Yvonne, if we think about what's happened in cybersecurity and just the whole, testing and policy making, right? There's a lot, and even code. I mean, code has gone under review, right? So that we know that it's not malicious. So it's an interesting separate, and Mike, I'm not addressing right this second all the other very important business issues, which is that, it's got to ultimately allow research to move forward. We can't block, right? We got to be respectful of the economics. And, the question is, how do we ultimately get to this other place? Okay, so I know I've peppered a lot in there. I see Terrence, you're first, then Rob, and then I'd love to hear also from Yvonne. Terrence, the floor is yours.
I just wanted to point out that this last part of the discussion shows why privacy and digital dignity will always be incredibly difficult. Because on the one hand, you have the individual who we want to protect. We want to protect this information. First of all, the individual may not view this information as particularly valuable to them. It's not something they want to fight for. On the other side, you have governments, which in the interest of research, safety, social stability, want to gather as much information as possible. And then you have commercial institutions that have found ways to monetize these data. So on the one hand, you have a fairly disinterested consumer group. On the other hand, you have commercial entities that are literally printing money from personal information. And you have governments that can use this for various means to stabilize their societies. So how can we shift the conversation so that those two powerful groups can be incentivized to protect digital privacy? I think that's an essential question.
Absolutely. Very important. And one hypothesis that's present here is that we think by monetizing the data, then all of a sudden people care. You know, if it's actually turned into value, then that potentially starts that, you know, that sort of equalizing of moving things more towards the individual rights. Rob, I see you're off mute. The floor is yours.
Yeah, hi. You know, just a couple of things on Yvonne's comment. You know, a real-time example of kind of a little step in the right direction is Apple moving from opt-out to opt-in for data sharing with apps using Apple iOS, and you know that's like retirement plans moving, you know, just the opposite direction. You have to opt out to make it easier to do what, you know, policy says is the, you know, the best thing for most people. So I think that's the kind of practical step that in terms of data dignity that companies can do. But more on the point, maybe this sounds provocative, but I think there's an urgency to address these policies that we've been discussing so much, because I think HIPAA has probably done more harm than good. You know, it's supposed to protect individual privacy, but it's actually been the veil that allows bad actors to hide bad outcomes from their services, and of course other ways make it difficult for individuals to get access to their data for, you know, even non-clinical reasons. So I think there is an urgency to this, and I you know, that, Elizabeth, you mentioned, you know, validation. I think we do need consistent validation of medical products, just like we have it with basically every other piece of technology that we use in our lives, and that brings us right back around the circle to, you know, we need to have more transparency about the outcomes of the use of both medical technology and you know, systems of care, or else we'll never be able to tackle the problems that we have.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And Rob, very apropos, because our next session on data dignity, we're inviting all the major policymakers, staffers that are focused on this. So this is the next meaningful conversation, is, you know, the really getting policymakers listening to these discussions, I think is very important as they think about how we forge a different path. That said, you know, all the other things that we've discussed here, including the multidisciplinary, public-private, you know, really thoughtful engagement, which is not going to be a once and done. It's going to be a persistent body of work. Yeah, lots of really good points here. Linda, I see you came off mute, and then I want to also hear from Yvonne.
No, I was just going to say I agree. It's going to be an iterative process. It's not going to be one and done.
Yeah, this is like an ongoing, you know, I mean, in some ways, from a policy perspective, this creates a whole new set of jobs too. You know, just saying, right? Just like, you know, cybersecurity created a whole new industry. You know, maybe not for the reasons we wanted, but we're here. Okay, Yvonne, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I thought Terrence raised a lot of interesting points, and I wanted to add to that list of entities, you know, people and government and commercial entities. You know, organized crime is another factor to consider. One of the most difficult things that we face in the cybersecurity space is how many layers of technology there are, how fast they're all changing, and how they can change the landscape. Cybersecurity is, I often like to say, it's like a chess match where your opponent can reinvent new pieces with new moves at any time, and they don't have to tell you what those pieces are. And there are thousands of those opponents. So, you know, drafting a great plan is not the approach. It's going to be out of the date by the time you even proofread it. We'll need to develop mechanisms that will be much more agile in terms of anticipating issues that could come up, both in terms of what human beings do, and all the layers of technology and how they're changing, and figuring out how to mitigate the issues. It's already quite a challenge in the cybersecurity space, and it will get greater every time you add something new that can be monetized.
I think the That's a really good additional, although somber thought. Clearly, I mean, I think we're all clear-eyed here on that. Yes, I guess so true. Okay, so as we come to the point of our dialogue where we essentially like to think about, okay, given everything we've heard, you know, what's next, what needs to happen? I think we've clearly heard, let's get a bunch of policymakers thinking, let's get multidisciplinary folks together. I want to give the panel one more round the horn here to just closing comments, thoughts, and you know, kind of what you think the next piece of the game, at least what we can be doing here as we invite this conversation. So with that, maybe I'll turn it first to Terrence. May I give you the mic?
Thank you. As a closing thought, one, this has been an amazing discussion, and I've learned a lot from the other panelists, so thank you. What I brought out of this conversation is inherently, I think the most important thing for us to do is to monitor the outcomes of these systems that are being built with our PII, our personal information, because we're starting to delegate more and more decision making to automated systems, and we have to understand how our personal information is impacting them and how the societal biases around our personal information is impacting them if we want to create an equitable society. Thank you.
Thank you, Terrence. Really appreciate that. Next, might I turn it to you, Linda?
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, emphasize what Terrence said. And in terms of the outcomes that you're talking about, Terrence, I think that we need to have a really holistic perspective. And what I mean by that is not just necessarily, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the outcomes, but I'm talking about the outcomes I'm thinking about the outcomes on many different levels too. So perhaps, thinking about outcomes in a very broad sense, in a very holistic perspective. The important thing is I think we need to continue this conversation, continue the journey, so to speak. And as Yvonne had pointed out, from all stakeholders' perspectives. So I look forward to working with all of you in terms of how we can construct such a model and use it in a way that will lead to a more just and equitable society. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Linda. I really appreciate that. And next, Mike, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, I think maybe just a closing thought is given COVID on one hand, driving the awareness of the importance of research and advancing medicine. On the other hand, I think the social media networks and things might run in different where we stand. Maybe there's a little bit of a extra focus on how they're using the data, and at the same time, those are the same ones that are good about maybe getting a message out, like, hey, you don't know it. So I don't know. It seems like there's maybe a perfect storm in time. So I'm excited to see where it goes. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Michael. Yvonne.
Thanks. This is Yvonne. I think another thing that we're going to have to think about is how will data be priced, and how can we ensure that that doesn't increase the digital divide? For example, a more affluent person who maybe has more time to spend online, would they generate more data to sell and therefore benefit more than a poor person who doesn't?
Hello.
Them or however they're using the data might pay off more. even though that might not be correct. But you know, it could mean that people in already affluent countries are paid more, again, increasing inequality. So I think, you know, just how data will be priced is another factor in the conversation that we've already identified has so many different directions. So I just wanted to throw that out there as another angle. This is Yvonne, I'm done.
Oh, Yvonne, thank you so much. I love that. Really good addition and a whole conversation around that topic. I think we should have, you know, maybe in the next, not this immediate next one, but the one afterwards. So consider it an invitation to come back and really dig into that in a meaty way. Thanks so much. And then Rob, may I turn the floor to you?
Oh, sure. So my head's exploding because as we go around, just more good points of view are added to this conversation. So I'll just leave this. I love to use a clean sheet of paper when we're talking about such a difficult policy issues we have now. And if I were starting a conversation to get to the right ending point, you know, that could end with policy, both structural and cultural policy, I think I would start with one, if privacy is a fundamental human right, I presume that we all would agree with that. And then secondly, if healthcare and some access to public health is also a human right, which most, at least Americans, have consistently thought was the case for a long time, then in that context, how do you create a framework for the structure of personal and societal balance with respect to you know, all the interests that we're talking about, and which really requires you to address what Yvonne just mentioned as well, because I think if you get into this, the benefits, the compensation for giving up certain or contributing personal data into this pool, you know, maybe monetary, maybe in kind, it may be lower cost of healthcare, maybe more public health, it's just all kinds of things like, but it is a, you know, we have to think of it, I think, holistically to get to the right end. And so I'll just leave that as a possible starting point for some other future 5-year conversation. Thank you.
I love it though. No, really, I mean, what is just amazing is in the few conversations that we've had on this topic, we've had such a rich tapestry of sort of examining all the contours of this. And just for the panelists, thankfully, Julie and our team is sort of keeping notes, and we've got a virtual whiteboard going. And so A, I want to just say deep thanks for participating. And B, this is an open invitation to come back and participate again. And also we'll be circulating the virtual whiteboard so that, you know, folks can also help shape the next discussion. As I mentioned, our next dialogue is going to be really focused with policymakers. So some of these items, I think we'll see the debut again. And with that, I want to say thanks to Julie for, again, putting this together. I know that it takes a lot of work behind the scenes to rally our group, and look forward to seeing you guys next time. And you know, deep thanks to our panelists again for your thoughtful engagement. Julie, I'm going to turn the floor back to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hi, this is Julie. Thank you so much, everyone, for your contribution. It's a really exciting conversation today, and has just left me with wanting to have this to go on for an infinite amount of time. So it got really interesting there at the end, especially. Thanks so much for your contributions. In closing, again, I'm Julie Szmyd. I'm project manager at Consuli and host for this room and club. As we wrap, you know, I just want to know, in addition to this room, and we host our clinical trials room and our long COVID room. You can tap on the house at the top. Make sure you follow Consuli Conversations, and you will get notified when we do host our rooms. Be sure to check out profiles of me, Elizabeth, everyone that's on the panel today. And for any questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, if you have anyone else that you'd like to invite that you think would be great for our panel, please reach out to me directly. My email is in my bio. Also, please follow us on our social medias and follow along, learn more about us, see what we're doing. And again, for those that joined our event after our opening announcements and do not yet know Consuli, broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company with the mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. Experts do suggest our individual data is worth approximately $20,000 per year, and we help people take control and choose who gets access to and how their personal health information is used, and if and when desired, get them paid for their data, all while making medicine better. We do this by operating a marketplace for members where we become their agent. Our members receive smart matched individualized offers from us for opportunities, including to participate in clinical trials and data trials. There is no cost to join our movement. You can learn more about us at consuli.net. That's CONSULI.net. Can't wait for our next Clubhouse discussion. I will leave everyone with a little bit of music in case you want to poke around the room and look at people's bios, and I'm happy to make any connections for anyone interested as well. So thanks so much for joining. This is Julie and I'm done speaking.
Thanks again, Julie, and thanks panelists. Have a great rest of your day.
Good night. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for
Thank you.
bringing us together.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thanks so much.